Something really important happened in Melbourne this week that our news media didn't report enough on, the ASEAN-Australia conference. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The 10 Southeast Asian countries work together for economic prosperity and trade. ASEAN has had a strategic relationship with Australia for 50 years now. To celebrate that anniversary, Australia hosted a little meeting of ASEAN leaders and Australia in Melbourne. It's really important that we have good relations with the ASEAN nations because we share a strategic desire to keep China in check, and because ASEAN represents a massive trading bloc for Australia to sell its goods to. Now, one country, the Philippines, is perhaps our closest, strong and important ASEAN partner. They're further away than Indonesia geographically, but we've got more in common with the Philippines because they're a predominantly Christian country that was a colony of European Spain for 400 years, then a protectorate of the United States for the first half of last century before fully getting its independence. So more English-speaking, more Western in worldview like us than other Southeast Asian nations, except maybe for Singapore. In the 1980s, the Philippines had a president, Ferdinand Marcos, who became more or less an authoritarian dictator and who enriched himself and his allies through the ownership of big industry and the siphoning of funds that were coming in from the US, the World Bank and IMF loans. He committed many human rights violations and he was tossed out in a peaceful revolution. Not a shot fired in that people power revolution of 1986. Historians say that the US overlooked a lot of Marcos's misdeeds because he was such an anti-communist who stood against China. But by 1986, the people had had enough. The Catholic Church, hugely powerful in the country, swung its support behind the protesters and the opposition. A faction of military officers defected and refused to clamp down on the protesters, and some brave Philippine ambassadors in Europe withdrew their support publicly. This all led to US President Ronald Reagan, who'd been a close ally of Marcos, pulling his support, and that was the end for him. On the evening of February 25, the US government facilitated Marcos's escape to Hawaii, and he lived there until his death soon after in 1989. But all of that was almost 40 years ago, and it's been a pretty rough road for the Philippines since. Historical revisionism in the Philippines has sanitized the Marcos years. Marcos's widow, Imelda, famous in the West for her flamboyance and huge collection of shoes, became a congresswoman. And now her son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr, has become president, winning the 2022 election. And he hasn't been too bad compared to his dad. He spoke to the Australian Parliament this week and then he did an interview with the ABC's 7:30 report in which he said he wouldn't be following in the footsteps of the last Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte, who tried to move the country diplomatically away from the US and toward China.
The former president of the Philippines, Duterte, was making overtures to China, very strong ones. Have you decisively moved away from Chinese influence and back into America's orbit?
Well, I think it's important to make it very, very clear. Whatever the Philippines does because it is in our interest, not because it has been dictated upon us by anyone. As I explained it to President Xi again, I said it's my duty. I took an oath to defend the Philippines. And anyone who will help me in that regard, I must engage with them.
Was your predecessor getting too close to China?
Well, I think the situation between now and then is quite different. Together with Australia, we have a visiting forces agreement with the United States and Australia. These are the only two countries that we have them with. And we have a mutual defense treaty with the United States, which has been there for decades.
President Marcos told the ABC that he supports AUKUS as a stronger front to maintaining the peace in the South China Sea. He says we're living in a much more dangerous and risky climate than in the past on that front.
Why is it more dangerous? Just explain.
Because the potential for outright conflict is much higher now than it was before. And we worry in the Philippines because it could come from not a strategic decision by anyone saying, okay, we're going to war, but just by making some serviceman making a mistake or some action that's misunderstood. And that's why the ongoing attempt is always to try and lower the temperature, ease up on the rhetoric, and communicate, and just continue to communicate. if we can, at best, as I said, keep the peace in the South China Sea, that will be of great advantage to Australia, because the peace is maintained.
ABC 7:30 report host Sarah Ferguson then confronted President Marcos on his father's legacy.
Your father was overthrown by a people's revolution, and you are his only son. How do you resist the impulse to authoritarianism?
I have no impulses to authoritarianism whatsoever. We have a good system going. We are, I think we've learned to. We have a constitution that we have that we have gone by for the last 36 years now. We are hoping to make some changes to it, but. No, I have not felt any tug or temptation to make it a more authoritarian system.
Amnesty records that during that period, 70,000 people were imprisoned, 34,000 tortured, and 3,200 people killed are the numbers. And your father, in an interview, admitted that over 50,000 were detained. So I just want to ask you again, do you accept that there was a human cost?
Oh, yes,
to that rule?
There always is. It was war. And with war, the death and destruction is inevitable. But this is a war not declared by the government of the Philippines. This was declared a war. These wars were declared on the government of the Philippines.
President Marcos is talking about the internal threats from the communist movement and its guerrillas in the countryside, and the secessionist movement in the southern Philippines within the country's Islamic territories. Okay, but what about all that money that was plundered?
Contemporary court judgments acknowledge the atrocities that were committed, but also the plunder of the country's resources. Why wouldn't you want all of that money back in the hands of the Filipino people?
Well, the government fell. Cases were filed against me, my family, the estate, etc. And up to now, we have found the assertions that were made, we have shown to be untrue.
Quite a lot of money. I think 5 billion was already recovered. I guess the question is just this. Do you not want to see all the money that was taken returned to the people?
Again, we have signed, this family has signed a quitclaim, signed many quitclaims. Any money that you find is yours. And finish. And everything was taken from us.
I suppose the question is, other countries in the region, including Australia, want to know that the Philippines, and you in particular, as a Marcos, have come to terms with your family's history.
There was a time where the issue was Marcos. That's not the case anymore. And that's why I think the best proof of that is my election.
President Marcos, thank you very much indeed for speaking to 7:30.
Thank you.
There you go. Credit where credit is due. A pretty good interview there from Sarah Ferguson. It couldn't have been easy to put the tough questions about his father to him without ending the interview prematurely. She balanced it quite well. Bit of a masterclass there for Tucker Carlson, perhaps. Then again, poor old Tucker was actually in the Kremlin, so it would have been a bit scary, I reckon, to be asking Putin too many tough questions like that.